Hello, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Goldmaking, presented by Darkshore Capital. It is currently the week of October 23rd, 2018. Let's take a look at the market update for the week. WoW tokens remaining pretty static. A little bit of a slight increase over time, but nothing to be too concerned with yet. On that note, BlizzCon is coming up very soon, and, historically, BlizzCon has tended to result in some hype around WoW tokens. If I'm remembering correctly, last year, the WoW token price increase, I think, was largely driven by speculators thinking that the price was going to increase and thereby increasing the price because they bought up a bunch thinking it would increase and wanted to get it in before it got too loud or, not loud, too expensive. We'll see what happens this time. Otherwise, materials in the US seems to be on a bit of a downturn. Materials in the EU as well. Our BOEs that we're tracking have actually gone up slightly on the EU, not by enough to really call that anything, but down quite a bit on the US, both the T-Boos and the Gnarled Mood Ring, down 3 and 10% respectively. Interesting, another difference here is the Starlight Rose is actually up 12% over the last week, 26% on the month in the US. This is, of course, across the entire region. Not really sure what's driving that. It could just be the fact that some people are too lazy and don't want to use the new flasks, because Starlight Rose is useful for all of the old Legion flasks, which admittedly I'm still using now and again, just since I have them laying around and they're cheaper. Not seeing the same thing on the EU side, though. Then lastly, in the market update, ATVI, Activision Blizzard, down 12% on the week. I think that's, again, largely due to more market-wide movements, not anything to worry about for Blizzard itself. I think I mentioned it last week, Black Ops 4 was released recently, so that definitely got a little bit of hype around Activision Blizzard as a company, but overall, it's not really a big driver of price. Let's get into the news for this week. Pretty low on the news. Got a couple little quirky news bits that I did want to point out. So if you haven't heard of a fellow YouTube/Twitch WoW person by the name of Paral, he is a prolific farmer with some pretty insane amounts of time and runs logged doing transmog farming. Now, I'm certainly not a proponent of doing transmog farms. I don't think that's something that you should do if you're looking to get into gold making, especially at this point in the game. But it's more just kind of a really interesting thing what he does. He always records all of his runs, records all the drops, and gets a bunch of statistics about what you can expect. And for a while, he was doing this, 1,000 runs of Uldaman challenge in an effort to get some of the super hyper rare items that come out of Uldaman, such as the Papal Fez, which sells for over 1 million gold. And after the conclusion of his 1,000, he had not received any of those super rare items. And he's done another 500 since then. That's what this link is for here in the slide deck. And yeah, still no crazy items. So let this be a word of caution more than anything else. If you think you can just pop into Uldaman a little bit here and there and get some crazy 1 million gold item to help you out, think again, because I've got a lot of hard evidence that you're really just playing the lottery. Only other piece of news, more classic news. I'm sure anyone who's interested in classic has heard of this. A little bit more information about the demo that's going to be at BlizzCon was released. It's going to be in Westfall and the Barrens, a little bit more than just the starting areas, so you can kind of get a bit more of a sense of the game. And yeah, nothing crazy. They released a little bit of information about the engine and a couple of client changes, I guess you could call them, just things that kind of go along with the fact that they're building the game on the modern architecture for WoW. Things like colorblind mode is enabled, and there's some BattleNet integration because it just kind of has to be that way. But yeah, overall, I'm really excited for Classic. It's a huge nostalgia thing, but I think it's going to be super fun. Anyway, I won't dwell on that because we have a topic to get into. And this week, we're going to be talking about fundamental analysis. We're going to start by defining what fundamental analysis is. In the finance world, stock market, fundamental analysis, I'll just read the definition, is a method of evaluating a security in an attempt to assess its intrinsic value. Now, what does this mean? Because these are a lot of big words that maybe don't mean a whole lot to anyone who's not familiar with the field. When you look at the price of a stock on the stock market, you're looking at what someone's willing to pay for it at the given time, not necessarily what the company's actually worth. Like if you were to total up all of its assets, all of its people, all of its intellectual property, anything you could add value to the company. In an ideal world, yeah, that the stock market price should reflect that, but that's not always the case because there's other things that can affect it. So what fundamental analysis does is tries to take a holistic look at a company and find out what its true intrinsic value is based on as many data points as possible. Some examples are you can look at current and future products for the company, what the market sector that it's in, how that's performing. So, to use Activision Blizzard as an example, how's the video game industry doing? That's going to affect how Activision Blizzard as a company is doing. If people aren't playing video games, they're going to have a tough time making money. Are there any governmental regulations that affect the company? I don't know, like if you're an oil and gas company and they pass some law against fracking, that's going to have a pretty big impact on your bottom line. Other things like leadership is a huge big one that can be easily overlooked because it's not very easy to quantify the powers of a leader to affect a company, but I would argue that it's almost one of, if not the most important aspect of looking at a company. But again, you really have to look at all these factors and as many others you can possibly think of to get an idea for how a company is truly valued. And then once you come to a conclusion, this is really kind of where the art of finance and money making and gold making comes into play. Once you come to an agreement on roughly what you think, if that value you come to is different enough from the stock value, then that probably means that you know something that the market as a whole doesn't. And you can probably capitalize on that to make money, or in our case, to make gold. Before we get into some more talk about this as it relates to gold making specifically, I did want to look at a quick example just because I have it. Now, this is my spreadsheet for analysis on Activision Blizzard as the company. Again, we're looking at this from a stock market finance point of view. I do not claim to be an expert in this, but I do have some amateur stuff that I've done. And keep in mind, this is like me doing this as a hobby, and just the sheer amount of information that goes into it just from that can give you a sense of really how fundamental analysis really works. So this is kind of just, some notes about the company, what they own. So Activision and Blizzard. One thing you actually might not know, this was a surprise to me. Activision Blizzard owns Candy Crush, which is, that popular mobile game that was popular for a while back there. I'm sure it's still played a lot, on things like where they're located, when they were founded. This isn't going to give you some crazy insight into whether or not you should buy the stock, but if you're truly going to know about a company, you should know these kind of things. Then there's this more kind of analytical side of things where you look at their balance sheets and revenue and stuff and try and come up with a number based on what you currently know. Then some other stuff, this is just like all the games that Activision and Blizzard have released over time, just because the more you know, the more powerful of a decision you can make about a company and whether or not you should buy something. Actually, if you go to this Wikipedia page for Activision, they've got so many more games released than both Blizzard and King, which is the Candy Crush game maker. It was too much to put on the spreadsheet, but I did leave a link in there in case I ever wanted to reference it. So anyway, when it comes to World of Warcraft, because we do want to kind of bring this back in from the tangent that I wound up going on, fundamental analysis in WoW does thankfully inhabit a much smaller universe. It's much easier to understand all the facets of any given item that you may want to try and make gold on. For example, you look at raid consumables. Let's take flasks, for example. There's only so much you can comprehend about flasks, right? Like, what are they made of? What are they used for? Raiding, Mythic Plus, etc., etc. Who's buying them? Raiders, Mythic Plus runners, people who just want a bit of a power boost. So when you start looking at stuff like that, it's a lot easier in comparison to real life fundamental analysis to get a holistic view of any given item. And I think it's really important to do so because I'll use Legion, sorry, not Legion, I always want to call them Legion, Battle for Azeroth BOEs as an example. If you didn't play the game, and when I say play the game, I mean like raid or PvP, then you wouldn't know that at the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, haste was probably the most important secondary stat across all of the classes. Just across the board, it was simming the highest for everyone. So if you looked at a bunch of BOEs, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't have known the difference between a haste crit cloth piece and a mastery versatility cloth piece. You'd have thought, oh, well, they're both 350. That must be good. Well, in reality, no. All you have to do is look at the BOE markets on any high population realm right now, and you'll see the vast amounts of these items that are just sitting in the auction house not being bought. There's like 30 in some cases of one single BOE on the auction house. That's crazy for BOEs. And that's because if you're going to shell out that kind of money for those items, you want it to be worthwhile. You want it to have some haste on it. Nobody wants versatility cloth. And you wouldn't know that if you weren't playing the game in a rating perspective, or at least knowledgeable about it. You don't necessarily even have to play it. I haven't been rating very much at all this expansion, but I still know this stuff because I keep up with the game and care about it. So that's the fundamental analysis you can do on BOEs. There's really not a formula when it comes to this stuff. This is definitely, like I said earlier, more on the art side of things. So the more you know, the better informed you are, and the more informed you are, the more gold you'll make. So if there was one thing I would say to make you a better gold maker in reference to fundamental analysis, is just be curious. One of the best gold making tools there is out there is Wowhead. Just going on Wowhead, looking up an item, seeing where it comes from, how it's used, how it's made, if it's crafted, etc., and just kind of get lost in that. Because if you're curious about it and you care about it, then you're just going to pick up on things like where it drops, what the drop rate is, what are people interested in for it. And all this kind of stuff, if you have it in your head when you're trying to make decisions at the auction house, it's going to give that extra little edge that really makes you gold. So that's my little bit on fundamental analysis. And before we get too off on another tangent, let's get into some questions for the week. First question. What needs to happen for the Elixir of Rapid Mind and Medallion of the Legion to rebound in price? It's an interesting question. I actually really like this question a lot. And if you'll bear with me for just a moment, we can bring up the price chart for Elixir of Rapid Mind. We'll go to the Undermined Journal. You'll actually notice when I bring it up here that it's gone down in price as of late, which is odd because they've removed this item from the game. If we go and look at the regional summary, you can see if we go back to all time, there's this huge, really, really low price down here. And as we get farther and farther along, it goes up and it's tailed down here. And I thought about this for a little bit, and I think the reason for the drop in price is, despite the limited quantity available, nobody's leveling. It's hard to level now. It's like really difficult. It's not as easy anymore. It's a pain in the butt. So if you're going to level, like, you're probably doing it for the experience anyway, so you're not going to try and boost or, spend hundreds of thousands of gold on Elixirs of Rapid Mind to try and boost it up faster. You're in it for the experience. So I think that in order for the price of this to rebound, Blizzard needs to make leveling easier, which is such a counterintuitive thing to say, given that, if you don't know what this is a 300% increase of experience for 15 minutes. It's counterintuitive to say leveling needs to be easier to make the item that makes leveling easier more useful or go up in price. But until people actually care enough to do some leveling, like, no one's going to use them because they're just not. It's not something that's worth people's time. So that's my answer to that question. I think the same kind of goes for Medallion of the Legion. If nobody's leveling, like, nobody needs to be in Draenor anyway, and nobody needs flying unless they're going through Draenor to level up. Excuse me there, we got a little lost on the slides. Next question. Is it worth selling pets? How do you get them, level 1, or try to level them to 25 and hope for higher profits? I get this question every now and again, and I typically defer to Bregvid's answer on the matter, and that's just doesn't matter enough. I'm sure that there could be some gold to be made in leveling pets from 1 to 25, but for my purposes, I can't be bothered. I just treat all pets as the same level. I don't really bother trying to level them up at all, or doing really anything to try and boost sales based on level. Next question. Seen a large number of mats being dumped on the auction house. I think the person who answered this question was saying that a bunch of old and new mats getting dumped on the auction house on Proudmoore. Their server happens to also be one of my servers. Do I think this is due to some gold makers and players converting to BlizzBucks for BlizzCon and or players quitting? I don't think so. I believe I might have answered this question in the text when it was answered, or asked rather, and I really don't get the sense that people are converting to BattleNet Balance for BlizzCon. That seems a little bit proactive for the player base at large, and yeah, I don't think that's likely. Players quitting, I mean, yeah, maybe. Players quitting just to have some liquid gold for when they may come back. That way they don't have to sell things when they come back that might have lost value. I think more likely is people just kind of getting bored, or, I mean, not really needing materials. The Battle for Azeroth professions haven't really been terribly compelling for a lot of reasons. I personally haven't even really bothered with them yet, just because there's not a whole lot of reason for me to. All of my tried and true methods of gold making have stuck with it and been very effective, so haven't felt the need to branch out into them yet. And I imagine that there's a lot of the same feeling, and from what I understand, there's just not a whole lot of depth to it, so people are piling up mats from scrapping stuff for Expulsum and just kind of wanting to get rid of it, so they're dumping it. That's my my guess of the situation. And as for the old mats, don't want to speculate too much, but could just be people trying to do other content and, you know, farming old dungeons, farming old content, and lining up with a bunch of materials they don't need and just trying to dump them. I don't know. It is very odd behavior, and again, this is all speculation, so please don't make any decisions based on what I've said in answer to this question, but it's interesting. Definitely something we'll have to keep an eye on. And lastly, thoughts on the new 8.1 recipes that might shake up the economy. Are the rare hides and plat going to be useful for anything in 8.1? I'll be honest, I haven't taken a really deep dive into the 8.1 changes yet, but from what I've seen from a cursory overlook, again, I'm not too enthusiastic about it. There's a lot of BOP crafted gear that is coming in 8.1, which is obviously not very exciting for gold making. So that's kind of a dud there. And other things, like, you know, there's a few things here and there, like there's an engineering res, but it's only used for engineers. I think there's some new glyphs. Nothing that's really going to kind of change the game or shake it up too much. So I guess all in all, not too excited. I'm going to stick with what I know works and keep going from there. That'll about wrap it up for this week. Hope you all have enjoyed the a little bit longer episode this week, talking about fundamental analysis. Hope I didn't ramble on too long. It is something I am quite passionate about, so if anybody does have any questions, I'd love to discuss it further. It's possible the topic does deserve its own video as well, with some more thought-out examples, but we'll have to save that for another time. If you would like to ask a question, you can feel free to leave a comment on the YouTube video below. Reach out to me on Twitter at darkshorecap, or send me an email at darkshorecapital.com. That'll do it for this time, and we'll see you next time.